You're listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katee Van Horn.
Hi, Jackye.
Hi, Katie. How you doing?
It's a lovely Wednesday. I'm living the dream. It's 85 degrees in Phoenix right now because why would it be 85 degrees in February as one does? Oh,
86 today in Texas, going to be. And I realized that a month ago to the day, it was like, I don't know, 6 inches of snow. So
right.
here we are.
Here we are. Well, welcome to the Inclusive AF podcast, folks. We're happy to have you. We have a wonderful guest with us today. And so I'm going to just go ahead and kick it over to you, Tina. Would love for you to introduce yourself, share a little bit about who you are.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Katee and Jackye. It's great to be here. My name is Tina Paikeday, and I am the Senior Advisor for Responsible AI at Findem. Findem is a talent intelligence platform. We're about a 6-year-old venture-backed company that's grown through basically providing insights through both data, business intelligence, and AI that powers our platform. Prior to joining Findem, I was a partner and global head of the diversity, equity, inclusion practice at Russell Reynolds. And in addition to that, I started my career at McKinsey, so bring a strategic lens to the work that I do.
Awesome. Very cool. So I'm going to ask you the question that I'm sure you get all day, when you think about AI, what is, the most important thing on your mind? And then secondarily to that, how do you think about just bias that can creep in when it comes to AI?
So the first part of that question I'll take pretty quickly. And then the second part is a longer answer because it's what brought me to the work. And so, as I think about AI, I think about how rapidly it's evolving. I gave a talk just earlier this month on kind of 4 stages of AI. And I think if we think about it as an assistant or a point tool to be able to help us do our work more effectively, to really changing workflows and being able to process, whether it's in recruiting many more searches at a time through this concept of a super worker, to then being able to use it more or autonomously to be able to run on its own. I think the thing that, I think about, and, I haven't even talked about digital twins and when we can actually replicate human cognition, but being able to use it responsibly and ethically is probably top of my mind as it continues to progress probably faster than anyone would have thought. And so the second part of your question, is what brought me to my work at Findem is, the questions that I kept getting asked in executive search as it contemplated bringing AI into the work was whether I thought it would amplify or accelerate the biases that we know already exists in talent processes. And I thought, perhaps it could do the opposite. Perhaps that it could actually reduce and mitigate bias because it's helping us to make better decisions. And so, I had a chance to look under the hood and do some experimentation work and compare human recruiting to AI powered recruiting, whether that's through, solutions that are domain specific to recruiting and or large language models, and found that in fact, those solutions that are focused on recruiting and powered by AI actually increase the diversity of slates while increasing quality at the same time. And I'm happy to talk to you about how does it do that, if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think our listeners would love to hear that because I think it's front of mind for so many people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's quite interesting how it works. So, first of all, I must say that in order to do it better, the data sets and the algorithms need to be built in the right ways. And so, I think many of us know about cases from the past, even before the pandemic, where this has been tested. And recruiting AI learned to penalize the word woman because it was fed a lot of male resume data, and the algorithms then were trained on that data. So, it's important that what goes in will affect what comes out. And so if it's structured in the right way and really the AI algorithms or the algorithms that are making automated decisions are directed by humans to decide what are the important skills and experiences that we're looking for, then, the data set can be evaluated much more consistently and without the kind of bias that humans bring when we use heuristics to make decisions. So examples of that are I might use, proxies like the school somebody went to, the companies that they worked at, their job titles as proxies for skill evaluation. And what AI can do much better is it can actually use the data to understand what skills and experiences does this person actually have, as opposed to what their titles are, to move us from what I call sort of fast unconscious thinking to more slow differentiated thinking. And that's based on, the great work of Kahneman back from 1974.
Awesome.
I had a question. When you're looking at it, you had kind of mentioned about having to know that there is the right model. And so, as people are going through this, just as fast as we're trying to have ethical AI, there are organizations that are doing the exact opposite. And so, what do you tell people when they are trying to test AI tools? What to look for to make sure that this is not, or that the assessment of a candidate does have that ethics piece to it?
It's a great question. The first thing I would say is that, there's been a proliferation of the number of tools and what people have access to. So I'd like to make a big distinction between large language models or general purpose AI and domain specific AI. And I think I made the point earlier, but when we conducted our testing, and I think there have been other studies that have replicated this, what we find is that because large language models are drawing from vast and unstructured data sets, the level of bias that can be built into just how large language models are processing data actually results in more bias than humans. And so I want to be sure that as we're thinking about recruiting and talent decisions, that those who are looking to discern are focused on solutions that have been specifically designed for the talent domain, because those are the ones that are mindfully building these kinds of inclusive guardrails in place. And, as you know, there's lots of regulation around this. I think that, the New York Local Law 144 was the first to go in place. California FEHA followed thereafter. And, while the EU AI Act has been looming, some of the requirements go into effect in August of this year.
Well, what challenges do you think people are just having with hiring? Like, we talk about the AI part, but we have so much data. It's like wild. And I know that that's a piece of it, that AI really can be helpful. But what else are you seeing? Like, what are the challenges that people seem to be having with hiring right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, and it's almost like we need AI to cut through AI, because there's just such a proliferation for the number of candidates that are applying to each job. Part of that's, part of labor economics, but in addition to that, it's just you're able to apply to many more jobs as a candidate by leveraging AI. And so almost what's necessary, right, is to be able to use technology to filter through those resumes as quickly as possible. I would also say the other thing that we look at quite closely, and I'm sorry to keep focusing on AI, but like the skills that we need in the workforce are changing quite dramatically. So I often talk about, the fact that the half-life for certain types of skills is diminishing pretty rapidly. So, whether it's tool specific skills like coding in a particular language, and even domain specific skills where, in law or medicine, for example, we might have relied on experts much more in the past. The value of those skills is actually diminishing, and the perishable skills like critical thinking are the ones that are increasing in terms of their value or their relative value to the other types. In addition to that, I would say that the thing that humans need to do is to be able to apply judgment along with the critical thinking skills to know kind of what good outputs are. So I think that, looking for that judgment and critical thinking is where folks are moving or need to move in terms of how to think about the skill set for the future.
You know, I'm so glad that you said that, especially some of the pieces are diminishing, and being open to the technology and using it. I think our listeners and Katie know, like I went to the hospital. I had to go see somebody. I live in a small town. I had to wait for days. I had the answer according to AI, but then you're kind of scared, right? Like, okay, maybe it's not the answer. And then you realize, like, so many people have been hesitant in the past, but I got the answer not telling anyone what the computer said the answer was, waiting to go through the process, only to find out we had, because of the way things are moved historically, we had to wait 4 days before getting the official answer that just happened to be the same as the answer. And I think people need to trust the technology, because we're seeing that in hiring too. There needs to be human oversight and a balance, but also consistency, so that we can move fast when we need to move fast and know what to stop on when there's things that instead of of having that balance, especially in the hiring space. There's so many where it's like, just hire the person. I've seen so many people, it's like, AI said it was the best candidate. Your evaluation, we're using your job description and what you're looking for, and it says this person's the best candidate. Then they say, let's interview 8 more candidates. And then they're like, okay, let's go back to that person. And that person's now gone.
I think this notion of human in the loop is incredibly important, right? And so like as the capability of AI accelerates, like it can move from, once I think we started as point solutions, being able to use AI as an assistant to make us more kind of effective and faster at the things that we're doing, that quickly moved to being able to use it more as agentic. And like if you think about like car analogies, this is moving from the taxi driver to kind of the Tesla, right? That you're directing it, but it's self-driving. And then finally, right, moving towards Waymo. Like I'm based here in San Francisco where the Waymo's on, the strip between, that connects the Golden Gate Bridge to the other side of San Francisco is just filled with Waymos, where as it once was not, like being able to drive on its own. And I think there needs to be a very methodical approach to putting a human in the loop until we're comfortable getting to that more autonomous level. And I think that's the thing you're talking about is like it knows a lot of the good answers, but we need to start to trust it. And to be able to trust it, we need to put the right guardrails in place.
You will love this story, Tina. I think Katee knows where I'm going. So Katee and I took a Waymo, and besides the fact that we had to cross the street, Katee lives in Phoenix. I am in Waco, close to Austin, but I love them. I think they're fabulous and fascinating, especially when I need to get dropped off at the airport. Katee and I went and took a Waymo, and it said it dropped us off at the location. We were literally next to a dumpster, like couldn't find the front door, looking at people that look awfully suspicious. We pressed the button and it was like, "No, we're not there. Like, this isn't working. This isn't happening. This is not the right place." The person's like, "Yes, it is." Okay. And so we're getting so close to knowing where this is. And I'm like, literally, Katee, I'm stuck in the back of this hotel and they're not taking me. I don't know what is happening. So it's like also making sure that we're looking at the results, auditing on a regular basis. Sorry, I feel like I've monopolized a lot of the conversations, Katee.
No, I think those are all great questions. And, I think we do need to be careful and do all the auditing and accountability, right, that Jackye was talking about. Let me bring up 2 examples, one from the lens of just kind of your everyday recruiter. And then the other example I'll bring up is the example of the chief HR officer. And maybe I'll start there because I think like HR has such an important role in all of this as we think about the workplace being redesigned for the future, right? It is the leaders who are going to embrace AI and learn how to put bots on a chart, org chart right next to humans that are going to be the ones that succeed, in redesigning their organizations. And, as we look at, I did a data query of 7,000 chief HR officers in the US. What I found was that about 450 or 5% had AI fluency, and this is pretty robust AI fluency. And those that did fill kind of one of 3 archetypes. One is kind of the CHRO who is basically the strategic CHRO. So an example of this is someone who came from strategy, went into the chief people officer role and is able to think about the redesign very strategically and not only how it changes the business, but the workforce in addition to that. The second kind of archetype I like to think about is the digital CHRO, right? So the examples of these are people who have either added AI enablement to the chief people officer role or, partner very closely with the chief digital officer to say, here's when humans do things, here's when people should do things and how they come together. And then the last one is the transformation CHRO who goes from the chief people officer role to the digital transformation role because they understand like how humans need to adopt AI to be ready for the future. And I think this gets to your, question from the beginning, which is like, we're all a bit scared. What does this mean for us? Let me bring it back to the individual recruiter. And I think the key is to like learn AI fluency, right? So if you can do that and bring it along with you, you can go, from being that recruiter who does one search to compressing the search timeline by using AI to screen and therefore cutting the time in half. And then you can multiply the number of searches. And here's where it gets more exciting for me. It's not necessarily about efficiency, it's about elevating the role of the recruiter. So all of a sudden, what that enables you to do is to spend time developing relationships with both the hiring manager as well as the candidate And in addition to that, being able to elevate and have a more strategic conversation on sort of how do you find the right talent as the whole future of work is shifting. So I'll stop there.
I love that because I think it's a conversation that I'm having with my recruiters of just like, okay, and I think part of it is just the nature of where we are, and we don't need to get into politics and the economy and job reports and all that fun stuff. But we know that there are a lot of people who are looking for work currently, and being able to sift through 700 resumes when you used to have maybe 100, which is still a lot of resumes, but having to sift through all of them and do it in such a way that you aren't missing out on great talent, that is absolutely a challenge that I think every recruiter is looking at. So I love the idea of positioning them again as more that consultant, that professional that is developing, and really that, in that consultative role where they're able to say, not just, hey, let me be the order taker, you need 10X to fill these seats, but really what do you need and how do we get you there? So I love that idea. That's great.
And I like how you put it, right? The strategic sort of consultant rather than the order taker. I think that
Yeah,
sums it up nicely.
absolutely.
I need to it is understanding not just the relationship, but bringing more people into the fold of what the
Mhm.
role is actually going to be. And I think we can be surprised if we're looking at the skills, right? Now, who's going to be the best one to have the conversation that can speak the language? I think we are in a unique position because of AI, because we have all these people, forget everything that we used before in how to find candidates. It's what is a profile of the best person for this role? These are the things that we're needing. These are the gaps. This is what's missing. This is what we would like to have. And putting it all together, we don't have to, AI can help us build the recipe once you have a trusted source that's built for that to get. And I think we all here are love like what DEI can do for organizations, and understanding of being inclusive means taking the 700 million and looking at it a different way of the people that maybe we haven't looked at before, because we can get more specific and not density of keywords, but actually look at potential solutions based on the skills these people have. Right?
Mhm.
Am I right? Am I too optimistic? Am I
Oh,
being too optimistic?
I love that, and I think, you're also talking about the power that any organization has internally, right? So much data that the HR department is sitting on to be able to evaluate both success as well as to be able to label that data and say, here's how we think about the people that are sitting in our organization and the future of the organization. Maybe the skills are actually sitting right here, and we don't necessarily need to go outside. And I think that would actually help to solve a lot of the diversity problems because, all of the data shows that the big reason, right, for diverse candidates leaving organizations is to get those advancement opportunities. And what if they're sitting right there within the organization?
That's right. Yeah, we have to stop. I hate seeing people leave to get the promotion that they could have gotten in the organization if we could have just pulled those together. That's a really important point. Yeah, I feel like I remember somebody introducing the iPhone and them saying to me, I was like, why do I need an iPhone? I don't remember what phone I had at the time, but they were like, well, what if you want to go fishing? And you don't know how to fish, but now you have an iPhone, so now you know how. And I responded, it's a nightmare now where I was like, why would I even ever do that?
Yeah.
Right. And now it's like, oh, I can do whatever it takes. I see so many people that are like, I can do that. Hold on. And they just start looking. They didn't have the skill that are willing to take those risks. So now we see that, and we're in a point where it's like we can say, okay, this is the people what can we build at our organization? These are the people that we have. What should we be building that we're not? What do we have the capability of doing? And if we changed a couple of technologies with our jobs that we could be doing better than we're doing today, and looking at it as something that can enhance our experience instead of just not it's not replacing, it's giving us the capabilities of doing more than we imagined, I hope, in
And
theory.
I love that, right?
Allegedly.
Like, just being able to, like, using your iPhone, look at, whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, or another tool to be able to quickly figure out how to do something that you may not have approached, like fishing. It's an amazing example. Love that.
Still haven't fished, though. I'm still like, I'm afraid I'll drop my phone in the lake, but, I mean,
I
potential.
would take a fishing pole versus an iPhone, just as an
Hey,
FYI, Jackie, just
listen.
something to consider. But
Well,
it goes to the point though, because I think that's also where some of this fear comes from for people is what prompt do I put in or what question do I ask or how do I set this up in such a way that like right now I'm working with my AI team to figure out how do we set up kind of an HR chat bot, if you will, to be able to answer policy questions from our handbook versus, having to have tickets or whatever it might be. And so I'm all of the, Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, all of them, I'm asking them, similar questions to say, tell me what your thoughts are on this. But I think that's part of the fear too, is what if I put the wrong thing in? Or what if I ask the wrong question and then it returns back or gives me or sets up something in such a way that the wrong thing happens or we set ourselves up for a really not so great response.
I think like those are all the things that we as leaders and managers are worrying about. I actually think the scariest part is that, people are using these tools without the guardrails in place and they're just going with the answers. And I think, we need to, as leaders within the HR realm, put the right kind of guardrails in place while enabling the adoption so that we're striking the right balance, right, with like
Yeah.
good information that was not as accessible as it once had been.
And doing it for themselves. That's the part that's scary. Like people who are that like this, I use AI to like update my bio. And then sometimes it's like, oh wait, that sounds really good. Yeah, but is it accurate? Like
Right.
we're gonna have to like you've never done that before in your life. Like don't just put those things out there. But another point that I think is really important is understanding that there should be those guardrails, and you brought it up at the very beginning of making sure that you have those specific models and understanding that, like you what you're using may not be great for that. And keep going because the odds are there's somebody who's made a very specific tool for your use case
Yeah.
before you embarrassed yourself.
And this is where I think, like, really being transparent about how the tools work and being able to explain, right, to very simple audiences, whether that's at the fifth or sixth grade level, is incredibly important because understanding kind of what the output means is gonna be so important for the kinds of things, Jackie, that you're worried about, right? Because AI tends to have, like, this pro-social behavior where it might put, a really positive spin on something you put in about your resume that may not actually be true, and you wouldn't wanna be put in a place of misrepresenting yourself. So I think that's a great example.
Oh, well, and I recently read, and I am not going to be able to remember where it was that I read this because I take in way too many pieces of information throughout the day, as we all do. But that there was a court case that just was settled, or it went through the entire process, and it was basically talking about attorney-client privilege for HR people who were using AI for writing performance improvement plans or corrective actions and things like that, and the fact that no, it is not attorney-client privileged if you put it into
That's right.
some sort of LLM. You cannot say that, "Oh, well, but I sent it to my attorney as soon as I drafted it." No, they can use that, and it is subpoenable, and it's not protected under attorney-client privilege, and I think that's another piece to just be aware of, is that as HR folks, regardless of your role in HR, you need to be very aware of what you're putting into AI because it might return the result you want, but also what does that mean down the road? Because even if it's, using a tool to say, hey, review all these resumes for me and tell me the best candidates and here's the job description, how, can that come back and get you on the back end if, someone does go, I wasn't selected, why not? And what did you write in your prompt that, got this resume thrown out or whatever it might be. So it's an interesting time in this space. So yeah, it's
And
very
I
cool.
think what you're kind of referring to also is like, deployment risk or bias, right? I think a lot of us think about sort of historical bias or representation bias when it comes to putting the wrong data in. But on the back end of this, like if you use AI tools that were not kind of, the fit for purpose reason, you can end up in a lot of situations like that. So I think it's incredibly important for us as, folks guarding very sensitive information to be able to use the tools that have been designed with those guardrails in place for the specific use case, as you point out.
I think
Absolutely.
that's scary when I think about starting in talent acquisition at the, beginning of time, always was asked to do an analysis of the top 5% and then create a persona or, prompt, even though it wasn't AI at the time, of to find like candidates. And I always asked, first of all, like, what if they're not the best? What if they were just the best today or the best of the
Mhm.
worst that you have? Instead of that, why wouldn't we just hire better? And then the other one is like, we're using historic data. Tell me about your inclusionary practices to make sure that this is a good benchmark of talent in the first place. Because that's what broke up all of those algorithms before when we looked at Amazon with the things that happened with them years ago and some of the other our language tools is like knowing that historically and the historic bias is that if you've always hired men a majority, then that's what comes out. And I don't think people recognize that the nuance that happens just from being who you are or where you live or where you go. We're taught still right now limited into if you're not careful, the words we're evaluating how good somebody is putting developing a resume if we're not looking at the whole piece. And you want to be careful because again, like Katie is saying, it's not up to you to put somebody's full information out there to some, you know, algorithm that they haven't selected. That's
Mm.
when you start getting into trouble. And they are starting to do regulations. I think we're seeing kind of a back and forth. We're stuck somewhere between overregulated and not regulated. Like, depending on where you live or what's happening. What are you seeing in your research as you're talking to people? How are people feeling about that? Is there anything new that's coming around the corner?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's been a lot of soft law, and now the hard law is starting to go into effect. And I think I may have talked about it earlier, but with the EU AI Act looming, right? Anything recruiting times AI is under high scrutiny, and a lot of those requirements, right, go into place in August of this year. I live in California, as I mentioned before, kind of we're ahead of the curve on almost everything, whether that's, CCPA, our version of GDPR, California FIHA, which is now governing, anything that's making an automated decision in recruiting, whether that's AI or not, at any point in the cycle. That starts going into effect very soon. And so I think, we're seeing this transition, right, from soft law to hard law. And I think more and more organizations are thinking about sort of proactive governance through certifications like the ISO 42001 for managing AI when it is involved in very highly regulated industries like our own in terms of employment decisions.
Yeah, I think it is it's an interesting time. And yes, I agree. Like the guardrails that are being put in place, what will they mean and how will they change the way that we look at this work? I am curious. You used a term prior to us connecting, and I think it was actually while we were chatting at HR Tech about, bias interrupters, that using AI as a bias interrupter. Can you talk more about that and kind of the way that you frame that in your head and as you're talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about human decision making, we all have to use shortcuts or mental models to make decisions. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get through the day. So I think I talked about them a little bit earlier, proxies for skills, whether that's, title of job, the company you worked at, the school that you went to, we're using those as proxies for capability. And so as we think about disparate impact ratios, so that's, for those who are not as familiar as both of you would be, right, the measure of whether, there's a bias in the recruiting decision that's being made. Humans actually perform well below the 4/5 EEOC threshold. And if you actually look at recruiting AI platforms, they actually perform well above it. And the reason for that, right, is because of this fast thinking that we use that enables us to get through the day, introduces systematic error into the decisions that we're making. What happens with AI is it can actually slow down the thinking to what's called system two thinking. And that's kind of conscious, differentiated. We're evaluating all of the data against all of the criteria, doing it very systematically. As long as there's no bias in the data or the data is not training the algorithm in a biased way, then you'll actually result in less biased decisions. And that's true, right? For the vast majority of HR systems that have been developed powered by AI. And so that's what, I think is the silver lining of hope is that, at a time when so many of the policies have been dismantled, programs have been dismantled, functions have been dismantled. AI can actually be a novel bias interrupter that is actually much less biased than humans if and only if it's designed in the right way.
And if you don't
Which
do it that way, you're gonna be found out.
right.
Like, maybe not today, but as
Yeah.
we evolve, then I mean, it's gonna, you know, it's and it happens quickly. We're seeing it so fast, and it's up to us in talent acquisition and HR to keep up with the speed of technology before you just get ran over. It's moving so fast.
Yeah.
Said,
I think it's one of those things that, as you think about how we move forward with AI and, it's not going away. It's not something that, we can avoid, but it is, how do you use tools like Findem, whatever tool you use in the right way? And, I love the fact that this is front of mind as you built this tool and as you continue to make this tool even better, because I think it's one of those things that, again, so many HR folks are saying, how can I do this the right way? Or how can I dip my toe into AI without it being too scary or whatever it might be? And so this is a great way to do that. So I would love to hear from you, Tina. What is one thing that you want our listeners to hear about AI, about the tools that are out there, or about, kind of how you're thinking about AI?
and I would say that we've seen both real world examples and causal experimental findings that show that when AI is designed with the inclusive principles in mind, both for data and algorithms, that it can actually lead to not only reduced time to hire, but in addition to that, both higher quality and diversity at the same time. And I think that solves a problem that we've been sort of battling between choosing between the two. And we can have both diversity and excellence at the same time. And that's one thing I'd like to leave the audience with.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, because I think everyone has tried to figure out, or for years have been trying to figure out, maybe not recently with latest situations going on, but it has been, how do we overcome this diversity question mark challenge that we need to find great talent, but we're not knowing where to look or how to look or whatever it might be. This is a great way to use tools and really augment what we're already doing to make sure it's even better than if it's just a human going on LinkedIn or doing whatever to find great candidates. So that's fantastic. Jackye, what do you got?
Well, then on top of that, as you're bringing people into the mix, you have to make sure that you have a culture that can help people, is safe enough for people to do their best work. You don't want to lose the top talent once you get them in a place. And so that's the whole point of making sure that people can do their best work and bring those things to the table. If you're making the investment in doing all this work and then not building an infrastructure internally to nurture the talent, then none of it matters at that
Right.
point. You're gonna have to start over with something. And so make sure that you are intentional. You're using a model that is built for talent and that you continue to audit and analyze so that you can make sure that you're keeping that talent.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to say, for me, and this is my kind of stance on things and the mantra I've been sharing with my team is, what we all know, AI is not going to take your job, but it is gonna help your job evolve. And I think that's the piece that it needs to not be as scary for folks. And for any HR person out there, reach out to any one of us and I will tell you, I'm good enough to be dangerous on the AI front. But, I think anyone that has access to any AI tools, which everyone does, play around with it and just see what it does. And remember that it's always going to need a human touch at the end of the day, which you mentioned already, Tina. So awesome. Well, Tina, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. We truly appreciate it. Where can folks find you?
First of all, thank you, Katee. Thank you, Jackye, for having me. And people can find me at tina.shaw@findem.ai. Happy to be helpful. And thank you again for having me today.
Absolutely. All right, Tina, thank you so much. This is Katee Van Horn.
And this is Jackye Clayton.